strategy and progress. Today, our event will be going in several languages. Please choose the language that you want in the bottom of your screen, English or Ukrainian.
Please select English in the interpretation panel in Zoom. Я хотіла просто сказати, що сьогодні трошки формат нашого заходу
I just wanted to say that our today's format is somewhat different from what used to be traditionally, because our project is celebrating its 1 year. So we will be making it in a slightly different format. Our general presentation that we are preparing, it will be on the BRP's website and the website of our organizations. You can download them and you can look them up. What are the main figures for the financing of recovery, what was happening in the legislation, and what not. So the presentation is available, but we will talk about what was happening in the procurement. Volodymyr Landa will present his part. I would like to invite Hendrik Huitfeldt, the colleague who's managing the European Union representation in Ukraine.
Good morning, good afternoon, Alexandra and colleagues. You can hear me? Very good. I'm very happy to be here and to listen to this conference about procurement monitoring, which is a key deliverable under the project that Alexandra was describing, the Recovery Spending Watchdog, which is a project funded by the European Union and has been running for a year now. So I would like to thank the Center for Economic Strategy, the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting, and Technologies of Progress for the engagement and commitment for the work that we have been doing within this project. As we all know, funds for reconstruction are limited, and it's really important that it's spent in the best possible way and benefiting as many as possible and delivering measurable impact on people's lives. So this is important in general, and I think it's extremely important for Ukraine right now in this situation where we are with scarce financing and such a strong reliance on the external financing. And public procurement is traditionally the part of public spending which is the most exposed to corruption and misuse. So this is because it constitutes a major share of budget spending. In Ukraine, public procurement is amounting to more than 12% of GDP in 2023 and even higher amounts in earlier years. And the proper functioning of public procurement system is instrumental for the stability and economic recovery of Ukraine. Effectiveness and transparency of public tendering will be key for the recovery. And effective public financial control and audit of public procurement will be also really important. So this is the reason why we is working with the government of Ukraine on making the public procurement system more efficient and transparent. So relevant laws are being aligned to EU legislation. Innovative practices are being introduced based on the experience from EU member states, and capacities of contracting authorities are being built. But and not as important or not less important. So we also support the civil society to monitor how public procurement is done in practice. So we need to understand how this is, what kind of results we are getting from the public procurement process, and how tendering is done, and how the contracts have been executed. So I'm not aligning laws and building up systems is good, but if we don't know how it's really happening on the ground, so then we don't know how effective it is. So since the first month of the war, the EU is together with international partners, we have advocated for a continuous use of Prosoro for public tenders. And in 2022, we supported the SOE Prosoro financially to secure the continuity of the system. And we're happy to see that the system is continuous also during martial law, not only by the national authorities, but also increasingly by international partners, such as the European Investment Bank and the World Bank. So, but also, I want to say, like, the significant share of public procurement is also done at the local level. And that's why it's a close monitoring of public tenders also by local authorities is very important. And it is the result of these efforts, I understand, we're going to learn more about today. And I'm really happy to hear about the results of this analysis you've been doing. So I wish you a good conference, and I will be staying on and listening to you because this is an important topic for us all. Thank you, Alexander.
Thank you very much, Henrik. Також я хотіла би передати слово Глібу Веслінському,
I would like to also to pass the floor to Gleb Vishlinsky, the Executive Director of the Economic Strategy Center, for his introductory words. He can also say a few words about 1 year of our project. Many thanks, Alexandra. Really, as you said today, we don't have a really general, traditional project because really we are 1 year old and it's financed by the European Union and it's done by 3 organizations, the Center of Economic Strategy as the main, as well as the Institute of Economic Research and Political Consultation and the progress organizations. When we just thought about this project, we had some expectations that the recovery will become more and more, will take more, bigger and bigger share of our attention because the war should finish with our victory and the main topic will become recovery. Now we see that the war is still ongoing and the active hostilities still remain both in front and behind for some uncertain period of time in the future, but that does not mean that we should, and it's possibly to put recovery on hold. This is not the right thing to do. We have critical infrastructure, we have necessary institutions of building infrastructure for everyday life, for making sure that we can really provide for the necessary way of life. Therefore, we want in the future not to change the focus of our project because it remains in the same way urgent and so much needed how it used to be and how it is from the very beginning, because the recovery continues, the spending is done, the prioritization less, even under limited resource situation. Therefore, it's important to pay attention that not only we are preparing monitoring of recovery, something that we have been presenting regularly on these monthly events, and where we are showing the financial and legislative changes in the sphere of recovery. We are giving sub-grants to regional organizations. The work is ongoing. Our partners are evaluating the progress of recovery of some local objects, where it's important to see these materials, to look at the photos and to leave feedback regarding the objects. So this is very much a comprehensive project that we are very happy to continue for the upcoming year, for those 30 months, where we still have the common project of these 3 organizations supported by the European Union. Alexandra, passing back the floor to you. Many thanks. Really, in our procurement, this system of transparent procurement is very much important to make sure we can use the usage of funds effectively, because we don't really have enough money for the recovery. If it is foreseen for this year in the report of the World Bank that we need $15 billion for the urgent recovery and reconstruction, that's not only construction, but that's, of course, a huge amount of money. Of course, in the budget, we have much lesser amount allocated. So the question of effectiveness remains a big priority also for the government. So I'm passing the floor to Volodymyr Landa, who will present the results of his Volodymyr, please, could you explain which conclusions have you made and which drawbacks can be corrected in the system? Good afternoon. Many thanks for such a possibility. Really, we have researched what is happening with the procurement, and now we have done this preliminary version. We can see when we upload it into this public area. This will take place not so long ago from today, not so long until from today. I will now share the screen. So what are the key problems we have identified and which recommendations we can give? The key problems of procurement, which we see, part of this can be quickly solved, part requires more effort. First of all, it's huge number of regulatory acts, more than 10 dozens of laws, bylaws, which are being changed a number of times, also including 2 main projects that were changed more than 50 times. The other problem, Vladimir, are you showing presentation to us? Because colleagues are asking in the chat whether the presentation is on. Yes, apologies. One moment. I will share my screen. Now, can you see my screen? The second problem is the problem that the cost estimates are closed. Now, it's really making it difficult for colleagues. Also, we have some other limited opportunities to monitor reconstruction procurement. We don't have a very quick identifier. There are some classifiers available for goods and services. So with some separate codes, we are doing the analysis, but it's not always the same type of works because it can be recovery and reconstruction, or it can be something more. The other problem, we have a large number of sub-threshold public procurements. Quite. The other problem, it's the limited competition, which is seen. And also we see seasonality of procurement, including economically unjustified procurement. And how it looks like in the graphs, if we see this in the top left plot regarding this procurement in the top left areas, 10,000 is the threshold for purchasing without electronic system. So from 600 to 3,000 intervals. And we have 16,000 with the bigger ones for the amount of 99,000 for until 200,000. I think this is very clear. It's done to avoid more transparent purchases. And sometimes it is connected with splitting the lot to smaller parts in order to avoid the necessity to go to Prozoro. The graph below shows the number of, we can see that in the beginning of the year, the number of procurements is decreasing, and the biggest procurement value coincides with summer because it's very logical. The majority of procurement is very logical from the effectiveness of the budget. Of course, it makes sense to do in the warm period of the season, but we can see that whenever the year unrolls, the value of the procurement decreases, so they reorient to different types of works. That is should be a subject of separate research, but these are the tendencies that we see. And again, what we see, it's one of the biggest problems of procurement, it's low competition. We can see that slightly better situation is the agency of recovery, but some types of procurement, we can see a really small number of participants, and we're taking only the successful procurements which are completed. So whenever we see all procurement, we can see that the average number of participants is 106, even with the usage of electronic system. that's less than 1.4. Of course, there's a separate issue. Why so few are participating in procurement? Exactly which ways the agency of restoration is using to make sure that they have a better number. So these are the problems, but in order not to have problems with time, we decided to come up with some recommendations. The first recommendation, these are the policy which we want to introduce. First recommendation is to publicize estimates of construction procurement that is foreseen by the draft law 11.0.57 about transparent construction. We also mentioned that they do take too many changes. Sometimes it's justified, sometimes it's adaptation to the European. No, there are not that many draft laws. We only now have only one draft law regarding turning the procurement into something more transparent, something more public. The second recommendation is to implement mechanisms to prevent artificial breakdown of procurement in order to maintain this sub-threshold. We understand that 100 tenders for 100,000 hryvnia for 1 square meters of road coverage, that's not an honest practice. And to develop and implement amendments to government policies to reduce the number of procurements with signs of fictitious value. A separate topic is try to conduct a study about the reasons why potential bidders refuse to participate in procurement procedures. This could be the risk of interaction with the law enforcement officials, some increased interest to participants from public procurement from all possible sides, and not always this interest remains in these fair practices. And even for super big providers of such services. Also, since recently we have the possibility to transfer the until the competition of reconstruction procurement increases, to leave reconstruction procurement to the recovery agency without transferring these functions to the central procurement office. Also, in case there are some budget mechanisms that would increase activity of procurement in the beginning of the year, I think we should use such mechanisms to eliminate these calendar obstacles to procurement, introduce a risk-based approach to procurement monitoring, also to provide access to data on tax areas of companies participating in public procurement. So these data are, for the time being, are very much point to point. Some more recommendations. First of all, to investigate procurements with signs of fictitious value in order to preserve the sub-threshold feature. There are the research that requires attention, or part of that research, to investigate the reasons for breaking up procurement and then identify administrative barriers that can be simplified or eliminated, and prevent organizers from conducting a full procurement. So we have to investigate that. Apart from that, a separate interest is coming about companies who just it's important to understand the reasons why certain companies win all or almost all tender procedures in which they participate, which are the reasons which lead to such reasons, and also to conduct a study of the reasons that complicate procurement. Announcements in the first months of the year, and propose ways to ensure continuity of procurement, because that shall not become the bottleneck during the period of the quickest recovery, and we really hope that it will take place faster. And the last is some technical changes that can improve the system of procurement. First of all, it's about introduction of an additional procurement identifier in the e-procurement system that would determine whether a procurement belongs to the area of reconstruction and recovery. Streamline the indication of procurement codes, because now one and the same procurement can go as overall construction of big objects of roads, or like construction of some local road. And these are really different codes, and that keeps us from having an objective picture. And the tender organizers are not that limited to put such code at their own discretion. Also, I think it's very much important to streamline the indication of procurement codes, ensuring that tender documents are published in the machine-readable form. We have also seen in April some discrepancies in legislation between answers and clarifications to requests related to procurement. That's a technical issue, but it will allow us to really bring in line to the in compliance with legislation such clarifications or such answers that are provided by the tender organizers. These are the main recommendations. We will not stop too long on the procurement analysis. This will be added in the presentation, which you will be able to find on our website. Thank you. Volodymyr, many thanks. As usual, in your report, Gleb mentioned one of the components of our project is the subgrants. We have two types of competitions, which we're announcing every quarter. The first competition is the self-monitoring of the objects of recovery, where our colleagues are going to the ground, whether it was rebuilt without barriers, whether energy efficiency was taken into account, and the second type is the competition to recover various objects. I would like to ask to Vladislav Gladkoy, who is the chief of our grant department. It's the center of Steve Jobs Promotion Center who is implementing this. Vladislav, I wanted to ask you, Vladimir has presented at macro level the problems that we see at macro level, but you have already analyzed in more detail procurement in very specific projects. Please, could you tell us if you had any problems with accessing the data? What are the main challenges? Whether they do confirm what we have seen at the macro level? And maybe you can present some results of some projects. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. Thank you for the possibility to speak up. Our project aimed at monitoring, and it still continues, the monitoring of the recovery objects in Mykolaiv region. If our project has some free time, we thought that we would monitor the objects in Kherson, but we had some interesting situation. The chief of one of the departments of the Kherson military administration, she was detained with the possible overspending of 7.7 million hryvnia in April. After that, she was let go with 800,000 hryvnia bail. So it turned out that this official, together with two more chiefs, the head of the contract organization and the head of another organization which is connected with the of this contract, who should have done the assessment of the losses because of the shelling of Russian Federation. They artificially increased prices, and our law enforcement colleagues were very much proactive. This was also connected with the changes in the Kherson Oblast administration, and in general the losses that could be given to the state because of the ineffective use of funds. So these changes did not take place. That's what concerns the Kherson Oblast. What concerns the Mykolaiv Oblast, during monitoring of objects, we faced the situation that, first of all, the officials mostly don't want to take on responsibility for providing answers. They refer to some general norms of the acting laws. They refer to the martial law, to some various other factors, or sometimes they make references that the building of the Mykolaiv Gymnasium number 2, which is also the monument of heritage, that it shall not report to a very specific department, or this is the issue not to the Department of Education, but rather to the Department of Construction, who will be doing this restoration works and the like. That is the answers to these requests, even if we do get on time. Most often these replies they look very much like simply just write backs, no official communication, and to improve the cooperation and understanding with the officials is quite difficult because very often they speak in the official blah instead of simply explaining what was the reason why this object was chosen for the first priority recovery. They're trying to make complicated answers to fight away the wish for us to understand what is actually happening at this object. And because the monitoring is done through the distance and there is no possibility to come over and to see the object, so we are monitoring those messages which are coming either in the social media or what is done by the respectful journalists. They come out, they make photographs. We are also monitoring the Prozoro, which procurement that they have done.
У вас має бути ця можливість. Спробуйте, будь ласка.
Зараз, секунду. Ага, є кнопочка. Так, тут треба знайти правильне віконце. Так, секунду. Я вибачаю за технічну затримку.
Apologies for this technical delay.
Ага, все, бачу. Так, ось презентація.
This is the presentation.
Ну, це назва проєкту.
This is the name of the project.
Коротко історія про те, що було
This is a short story what was damaged overall. As at November 2023 in Mykolaiv, this was 1,120 multi-storied and more than 1,000 private settlements. 30 multi-storied buildings and 100 private buildings are not possible to renew. This was as a consequence of those challenges that take place even now. On the 8th of November, the Department of Town Planning, Architecture announced the project about a tender for the restoration of the Mykolaiv Gymnasium number 2, because this is an architectural monument of local significance. Used to be a place for city girls' school, and this building was erected back in the second half of the 19th century. That's how this building looked like. Overall, into this building and near, there were more than 4 significant arrivals. Partially, this building was dismantled. They fully destroyed windows, doors. So for the recovery and reconstruction, this is the infrastructural, and this is the cultural object, and this is the object where we have educational process. So by many criteria, it does fit the first priority recovery. And on the 28th of November, the department concluded a contract for construction works with the total cost of 145, almost 146 million hryvnia, but they seem to have saved money because the preliminary assessment gave like 153. There is a small nuance. Some evaluation was done by the company who is relative somehow related party to this Житлопром Bud 8. If somebody comes, so it will turn out that this company has quite not so beautiful smell in its activity, connected with some litigations or some some suspicious actions. And what we have seen, the contract specified the use of cerizit waterproofing mixture worth 46 hryvnia per kilogram, while the market price for the same product is 27.6 hryvnia for 1 kilogram. So we can calculate that they have increased artificial increase almost twice the usage of this cement for waterproofing. And in the same way, almost twice, they did the same for bricks. This building is made of bricks. A significant part of this building can be restored even from zero. This will not be even the restoration work. This will be like a full-scale renovation and reconstruction. And the price for bricks was also made. And we have seen such possible price increases. Something that our law enforcement officials can look at was actually 13 items. And this is the situation just for only one out of the 20 objects that were monitored. We really hope that there will be the necessary response on behalf of the Mykolaiv Oblast administration and from the Mykolaiv City military administration, because it was correctly mentioned in the beginning of our meeting, the number of funds for the recovery, the amount of funds for recovery, it's not limitless. It is very much limited, and we have to use them effectively. Thank you for looking up this short presentation. Here is the website of our organization. Email, in case you have any questions, please do come back to me directly. Thank you very much. Now how I shall turn it off.
Там є така функція, червона кнопочка.
Ага, стоп-шерінг, все, бачу, дякую.
Stop sharing button.
Дуже дякую. Я трошки поміняю порядок, як ми хотіли виступи
I will change the order how we want to do this. I actually wanted to ask Dmitro to comment what I heard. Dmitro Savchuk is the deputy head of the State Auditor Service of Ukraine for the issues of digital development, and they are responsible for the monitoring of procurement. Vladimir said partially about recommendations in terms of the risk-weight approach for monitoring of procurement, and I know that you have done monitoring exactly for the recovery projects with the liquidation fund, and I have seen several news on your website. Can you please also comment what was mentioned by Vladislav now, the recommendation that Volodya has said, and what you are facing? Do you have access to the data which is necessary, or is it still a challenge even for you? Welcome. I would like to say that not always these recommendations will work, because whether this procurement was published on Prozoro, whether this procurement was published at Prozoro, or it was done as the direct procurement. So during our events, we see a lot of cases that is done under direct contracts, so the tender procedure is not working in Ukraine, and that really doesn't make that actually this risk-oriented approach, it will be like a fancy tool, and the effect from it will be zero. Together with the Ministry of Economics, we are really working on risk-weight selection, but we have to prepare some capable organizations who will be doing this, as well as the capacity at Prozoro platform, because a lot of questions connected with this has to be in the machine-readable form, because exactly from the machine-readable form we have to take the information out to make sure that the language models would work on that, and that's what it will be, the risk-oriented approach. Now we can see that yes, we have such companies who are 1 year old. They have. So for this, we would need a lot to rebuild, and we have many more problems. It's not only this. This is not the only solution. Maybe let's go from the beginning. We have a more fundamental project which is connected to separate process. We need to understand how we should define the priorities, what is to be built in the first place, which technical solutions should be implemented. Does it make sense to rebuild it now, or it can somehow in the different direction to go? So we have seen very often the ordering of this cost estimates for the houses of culture, the objects which are not the priority. When we see Kharkiv is suffering and a lot of people from Kharkiv, from Sumy, from Donetsk region would want to go somewhere, there would be very much absolutely not interesting that we rebuild somewhere the house of culture or the library. That's my assumption, and is based also on reading the legislative base, where in the law on the regional development, we had some logic for this recovery. We have to make some regional plans of recovery of the territory. We see the problem that these priorities are not built up. So on the ground, at the local level, they're choosing them themselves. Here we are working, here we are not working, here we are constructing. The question about costs, it's also in this fundamental problem, the absence of what we call the costing, that is the evaluation of the property. That concerns both construction and not construction types of services. This sphere has certain methodological recommendations which were adopted by the Ministry of Economics, and take into account that we have them as recommendations. They are not forcing the objects of control to calculate something and to define the value. In construction, it's better. The Ministry of Regional Development, this ministry with this long name, which we call the Ministry of Regions, has the adequate policy of defining the value of construction. And what you're seeing next of artificial increasing of bricks or waterproofing mixtures, they do have policies of defining the costs. But when it's done under direct agreements, direct contracts, we simply have to step in, find it, show losses that were done against the local budget, but whether it will help us as citizens who have paid our taxes and finance this loss-making. Another question is the quality of the works, the comprehensiveness of what has been done, and timeliness. There are a lot of cases when we are coming and we are forced to state that the works are not completed. Recently, we did the review of the Department of the Regional Development of the Kyiv Oblast Administration, and we have seen a number of violations that really demanded from the contractor and from the company that ordered that these works have to be completed and the sites have to finish their commitments. But we do have the situation when we have some fictitious companies who ordered it. Somehow, some companies have preferences regarding tenders, or the companies stating their address, these companies don't exist. We have had some big contractors in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, and they're receiving significant orders from the Oblast Council and from the City Council. We have beneficiaries and subcontractors who are under sanctions, sometimes Ukrainian, sometimes even American sanctions. So in case we have this risk-weighted approach and selection, we will shed light on that once we go back to the procedures. But we do have a lot of problems that could be solved before that. Step number one, returning transparency and accountability when we have tender procedures. So we would at least see that something is being traded on ProZorro and there is the market competition, not under the preliminary agreement when the contractors would come over and would prepare everything. The second problem is coming back to the more strict price formation. This will lead that we need to improve the professional level of the consumer, the one who will be managing the funds for recovery, we have to understand how the cost estimates is made, the feasibility study, that the windows would really fit the regional conditions. This will help us in the future when Ukraine will be using the funds in the Ukraine facility. Because when we make the research on legality of use of the funds can be done either by the Ukrainian side or the European side. It's very important that our contractors would not get lost, that they would be there on at their addresses, that this would be reputational companies, not the ones that are re-registering when they have reviews of their construction. So there must be some sanitary cleaning of the construction market. Maybe we should do some ratings or the blacklists for the contractors. It would be very much useful for us as sponsors of this banquet. So we would also love to make sure that DREAM would also develop this system that has the project documentation, that everything would show up there, that finally the cost estimates which are made in AVK software could be used for price comparison. Imagine we can have 20,000 projects of construction is uploading, and DREAM can really make this automatic comparison and to shed light on the ones which are not transparent, which are artificially increasing their prices. We are very happy to work with you. And Vladislav mentioned about some attention to the Kherson region. Now, in this quarter, we have to complete revision for the recovery, for the Department of Recovery of the Kyiv Oblast, and the priority for the third quarter for the subdivision that is doing the control. We will do the revision of the Dnipropetrovsk and Kherson Oblast related to the recovery spending as the prioritization factor. This was the fact which you mentioned about the head of the department that was stealing money. So we will be very much happy to work on this. We are very much interested in your analytics. This is really something of the private-state partnership of the newest times. Thank you. Many thanks. It's a great pleasure for us when during this event that we have such agreements about cooperation and collaboration. That's a great pleasure for us. I would like to ask Alexei Movchan, the parliamentary, the deputy head of the Committee of Economic Development, to comment what exactly the parliament can do in the direction of the recovery of the tender procedure. And since the start of March, exactly at your committee, there is this draft law about the obligatory publication of prices. This could reply to certain questions that were mentioned by colleagues. And for instance, I have not seen the committee conclusion. We do have some conclusions from the scientific and expert department, but your conclusion is not yet available. What is your plan? Many thanks. Welcome to everybody. Good evening. First of all, I would like to remind the participants and the experts that since the beginning of the war, starting from March of 2022, the issue of regulating public procurement, it is at the level of the government. What you're seeing these days, these direct contracts, exceptions from the resolutions, what concerns the competitors procedure, this should be done by the government, by the Cabinet of Ministers. Therefore, first of all, we can ask questions to the officials, especially the ones who are present during this event, why certain things do exist. This was exactly created, the temporary investigative commission for the regulation of the public procurements, because the consumers, with the gaps in the resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers that were regulating the issue of making this tender, and the possibility of concluding direct deals through urgent needs, where we had anything to eat. And with this, we have really misused it. That's why we created in the parliament a special temporary investigative commission. Its recommendation was approved and given to the government to make sure that they would introduce changes in the respective resolutions. Some changes were introduced, but objectively speaking, it's way too far from the high-quality regulation. I can only say that this was a very unsuccessful experiment that was caused by the challenges of time, challenges of the war, because when the legislation on public procurement was 100% within Verkhovna Rada, what was the strong point? Yes, difficult to introduce changes. You can't make a hole in the law. Let's put it this way. You can do it, but it's very difficult because introducing changes to the procurement law, it should be done with the specially law. There was some profile committee, and there were quite a lot of things to prevent this. Because of the war, we conscientiously gave this authority to the government, because introducing changes, it's a lengthy process. So we chose security. Maybe the consumers will pay more, but they will be anyway able to buy, for instance, generators, some other things for the needs of the civil population, any things for the military, but of civil use, and so on and so forth. So what's important, what we have not given the possibility to make it outside of the system of public procurement, that is, there were also such initiatives in the beginning of the war. But today we see, and I think the government sees it too, that it's already time to come back the issue of regulating public procurement at the level of the parliament. In the first place, because of that bad experience that had taken place during these 2.5 years when the regulation was in the government instead, and each and every meeting of the Cabinet of Ministers in the resolution on regulating public procurement, they made certain exceptions all the time. And this exception was used by a lot of unhealthy consumers. And today, the government is already looking at, maybe, I don't know, can I say, do we have already the draft law that they should have introduced into the Verkhovna Rada or not yet? I think experts would know better, the ones who are knowledgeable about regulation of public procurement. That is the new number, the new edition of the law on public procurement that would really resolve a big number of problems, because let's speak honestly, what was all mentioned is really too far from even normal. That critique that was mentioned today into the system about the system of public procurement is very much objective, and the system of public procurement is very far from normality, including the issues which relate to the system that has to function during the war. Starting from artificial increasing prices, there are always two sides. Somebody says it's business relationship, somebody says it's corruption, but we definitely have the confirmation that the more we have competition in public procurement, and at any markets, if we talk about sales or about privatization, where we have a lot of also observations in our committee, the more competition is, the better would be price for the state. People will not be overpricing. Any problems will be solved with overpricing or with poor quality of execution of works, also during recovery. They are resolved by creation of high-quality conditions for competition. And this is the question exactly for regulation. It's the question for legislation, how to limit the consumers from discrimination, to make sure they would not discriminate against participants and would not kill competition in the system. We talked about regional leaders. We have also national leaders who are collecting a big number of tenders all over the country, preliminary agreeing with the consumers. So there are quite many problems in the system, and I do believe that the new edition of the law will exactly solve this. What concerns the publication of cost estimates, it's exactly the specialized committee related to the anti-corruption policy run by Anastasia Radina. They have analyzed a huge number of procurement, and they have seen that, yes, at least for the high quality securing from corruption risks, or let's put it this way, for the better securing, we need some public information about cost estimates, by taking into account that the government has not provided that within the framework of their obligations. It was necessary to introduce changes into the existing law to make sure that the government would fulfill and would provide this possibility also in the electronic system. Therefore, unfortunately, with this very harsh method, you need to influence bigger transparency, openness, but that's a very ad hoc decision. Globally, to the justification of prices, this will not influence. This will be mostly about the accountability, control of the civil society for the spending. So I would like to thank personally to our partners for the support, of the reforms of the public procurement. We have quite a lot of problems and we have to solve them together. We have to spend more attention to the recovery. The state will not be able to repair everything using its money, and to repair this without stealing some part of the funds. So this is like an evolutionary process where we have to cut part of the costs and to give them to some private market. We are now developing the legislation, finalizing the legislation about public and private partnership, about concessions, that it's more available for the purposes of reconstruction, and we have to provide for the high quality regulation of the public procurement system, for the increase of competitiveness, decreasing discrimination, and publicity and transparency of the procurement procedures. Thank you. Many thanks, Alexei. I would like to pass the floor to Valeriia Ivanova, Deputy Head of the State Agency of Recovery and Development of Infrastructure. As Volodymyr has said, the procurement coming from the Agency of Development, they are mostly competitive. They look very much effective. I do know that both you and Mustafa Nayam, you are meeting business very often. You are making sure that they would participate in the procurement. And there was also a decision taken, which we really welcome, about the publication of tenders. I wanted to ask you if you can comment, do you need any changes in the legislation at the level of the law, at the level of the resolutions of the Cabinet of Ministers that Alexei has just mentioned, to make sure that these practices would be more sustainable, that this will not be your decision, so you would also be protected by the higher legislative acts. And we had also a discussion about the need of the centralized consumer, because the regional departments of the agency, they're making separate procurements, Some are doing it more or less effectively, others less effectively. What can you comment about it? We would be very much thankful. Good afternoon, colleagues. Many thanks for this research. It's important that the civil society is participating in controlling and monitoring and trying to understand which way we can evaluate that, because procurement for construction, they are most complicated in general in the state, because to buy some service or to buy some goods, you can be delivered and the contract will be finished. This is much easier than to make the procurement, and the results of your effectiveness can be known 1.5 years or 2 years down the road when the project is finally implemented. If we take some examples of the European countries, construction and implementation of huge infrastructural objects sometimes can last 5, 6, or 10 years. We have some conditions where we exist where we didn't have time for that. So we need to think of some new regulation to make sure we can prevent the ineffective use of the budget funds and the increase of the competitiveness. What we have done and what we have been working on, it's definitely not perfect, but it's really a good result, taking into account other consumers regarding the recovery objects. We have implemented methodological recommendations which we developed and also participated by Anti-Monopoly Committee and the Ministry of Economics and the donors in terms of which way the documents that the consumer is demanding, in which way it's creating discrimination, not because some machinery is demanded, but because sometimes the number of documents demanded by the consumer, it creates conditions for the business when you will make definitely a mistake and you will not be able to participate in the tender, knowing beforehand that other company will be better prepared for this. The other question is the publication of all data. It's very important to evaluate the construction if it's not a corruption agreement, that which object you can build for business without the project, without the cost estimate. If there are 3 lines of size of the works, volume of the works, it's simply not possible, not even in the case when you have a really capable company. Therefore, publication of the cost estimates, the values which are prepared by the cost estimates, that's very much important for the engagement of business. And the third very important issue is the dialogue. A lot of consumers are afraid to talk to business because they believe that this communication can be looked as corruption, that it will be fixed, but these are public market consultations that the consumer has to do in order to explain the conditions of the tender documentation and to change if the market demands that, that really affects the competitiveness of contractors. And the fourth aspect is the capacity of the contractors. The capacity of contractors to build one or the other objects. Unfortunately, the market of civil production, as such, we didn't have. It was working, I mean, companies were working with private money, and that's absolutely different. The normative regulation, the cost estimate regulation, and the documents that you needed to collect in order to cooperate with the state consumer, and that's always not equal conditions in the contract with the state consumer. I mean, if the Ministry of Finances did not give you the funds or the agency didn't transfer to you the funds, then nobody owes to anything. You have brought the machinery, you have hired people, you have paid for the materials, but as a result, you didn't get anything. So this is not really equal relations. And the companies do understand that there is such a risk, or there is a delay in financing. There is the calendar schedule that says that you have to rebuild it within 7 months. They put payments like to the third. You paid the money, you couldn't cash what was given to you. So this is the business who has not worked with the state before. It would be very much difficult to come to the market. And we honestly said, let's talk about the problems. If you're being discriminated against, if you have any conditions, let's discuss that, make sure that this competitiveness for contracts would be bigger. And the fifth fact is in the recovery, it's the preparation of the cost estimates. Unfortunately, the quality of the projects when it is prepared is quite low, not because the market doesn't have good quality project developers, but because for this we don't allocate enough time or attention to prepare the project abroad in such countries as Great Britain or other countries of the European Union, where they really approach differently to such kind of projects. They take more time for the design phase rather than to construction. They make these feasibility studies, they make what-if analysis, they're searching for ways of economic and financial implementation. They're searching in which way this project will bring cost benefit for the future. So these stages and this evolution that the state has to go through in order to prepare such projects, it's not so small, because Britain for 20 years was fine-tuning these contracts, preparation of projects, and management of these recovery projects. We, unfortunately, are still on the stage when we're comparing the value of pebbles with the value of pebbles. We don't simply have other system under which we can evaluate the life cycle of constructions, which materials are used. We don't really trust even the independent technical surveillance who are checking if it's mentioned, if this road stones are bought at this price, that they will be really bought at this price. We have to really bring up this discussion, knowing this construction has to be evaluated by different methods, because it's simply not viable to evaluate like this. And coming back to procurement, now in the Ministry of Economy, unfortunately, maybe we don't have present the representatives from there. Maybe they will be using their own methodological recommendations, what we have done together. And this was
рекомендаціями також будуть користуватися і підходити до закупівель ніяк до обов'язку того, що закон тебе зобов'язує, що в якійсь системі, і буде як буде, у нас є підрядники, ми знаємо, інколи це не про корупцію, а про неможливість ефективно організувати процес відбору підрядника, і не довіру до того, що вони там реалізують, про фаворитизм, який є неприйнятним для того, щоб побудувати нормальний
to make sure that we are building the normal system of limiting this potential misuses. So our publication of prices, it's our choice. Publication of cost estimates is our choice. Control of the tender documentation for the subject of the discrimination criteria within the agency of restoration is also our choice. But knowing that I may not be here tomorrow, and I want that if in case other people are here, I want us to really have a good system that would limit such kind of misuses. We have adopted that it must be published. Our services are fulfilling this, but this resolution can be cancelled with one decision. Unfortunately, things will terminate. I don't want it to be like this. It's important to fix such kind of things with the legislative acts, and I really hope that this law will be supported by the Verkhovna Rada and the Parliament. So I have a hope that it will take place, and I'm ready to continue lobbying this topic in a good way and to lobby the changes that are necessary in this regulatory acts. Regarding the methodologies, let me briefly mention it's important to invent some categorical strategies which we're missing, because the market is quite weak, construction market especially. Those companies that are working with the budget, and this is the problem, which is quite wide. It is wide in terms of regulation. It's also big within the relationship of the Minister of Finances. It's not possible that the Cabinet of Ministers would prioritize some object and they started to implement it, and then financing stopped because something happened. I don't know, they lacked funds or they changed their mind. So it has to be a more comprehensive approach. There should be a national strategy of recovery, and within that bigger framework, also the regional problems, and definitely the high-quality expertise using regulating the values. It's also important to use it. We take in the order of how to make this monitoring.
Вони роблять це за певною формулою,
That's done under a certain formula and
вартостей в своїх регіонах. І
methodology,
такий нормативно-правовий акт можна
and
затвердити,
such
він є у
normative
нас на сторінці.
act can be
Також є
approved. It's
методика
also on our
здійснення
page.
комплексного відновлення. Я думаю, що для органів
And we
місцевого
have also the
самоврядування,
manual for the
локальних
comprehensive
замовників
recovery.
це стане, можливо, корисно,
This
якщо
can
вони
also
захочуть
be
зробити. Для цього
useful in
вигадувати не
case they
потрібно.
want to do it.
Цей документ
Nothing
є, він
needs to be
розроблений разом з антикорупційним
invented. This
судом
document is
Європейського Союзу.
here. It is
Разом
developed
з ними
together
також
with the
робиться електронна
colleagues of
система здачі
European
первинної
Union,
документації
and we will
робити
also develop
Маю надію, що
a
це
new
продовжиться
system of
незалежності від того,
primary
хто далі
documents
буде знаходитися
submission,
в міністерстві або в
irrespective of
агентстві
what who will be
відновлення,
in the
коли
ministry.
наступне буде.
In the Ministry of
Я маю надію, що
Recovery,
цей проект буде
I
завершений.
believe that this project
Він
will
є
be
колосально важливим для країни, тому що всі
approved. It's so
казначейські
important for the country
проплати по
because
актам
also
здачі
all
мають проходити в електронному вигляді.
treasury
Зараз в країні цих
payments have to
бар'єрів
be done
немає,
in
що
the
тому
electronic
по всій
format.
країні будь-який
We
державний
understand
замовник,
that
коробка,
any
хранітка,
state
БТО, ГКБ, і більше його не міняється.
consumer, they
Тому я
store
думаю,
these
що
documents in
це
the
є
boxes.
важливим,
So
і маю
that's very
надію,
important.
що ці
And I
проекти
really
будуть
hope
реалізовані.
that these projects will be implemented at some point
Дуже
in time.
дякую. Я
Thank you
перепрошую
very
все-таки
much.
одну хвилинку
I
про
apologize.
централізованого
One more
закупівельника.
minute about
Ви
the
цю ідею
centralized
підтримуєте,
consumer.
чи
Do you support
якраз
this
вона не
idea,
ваша?
or it's not
Вона
yours?
наша, ми
It
її
is
дуже
ours.
багато
We have done
проробляли, яким чином це
a
можна
lot
зробити.
of
В рамках проекту з
attention
Європейським
how we
банком
can do
реконструкції
this
і розвитку
together with the
ми
European
проводимо Агентство
Bank
по
of
роботі
Reconstruction and
сертифікацію
Development. The
СІПС.
agency is growing through the
Сертифікація СІПС – це
SIPS
британська система,
certification. That's a
яка
British system
оцінює
that is
закупівлі
evaluating
і
procurement
організацію закупівель
and
у тебе
organizing
в
procurement
компанії.
within your
І ми
company.
проходили
And we have
відповідну
done
сертифікацію, і вони
the
нам
necessary
рекомендували, яким
certification,
чином
and
ми
they
маємо
recommended to us in which way
зробити
we
цей
have
контроль.
to
Вони нам
set
запропонували
up this
модель,
control.
яка,
They
на жаль,
proposed
не
a
підпадає
model
під
to
закон
us,
про
which
публічні закупівлі.
unfortunately
Тобто наш
doesn't
закон
fall
про
under
публічні
the law
закупівлі говорить
of
про те,
public
що
procurement.
ми, як центральний орган виконавчої влади, не можемо втручатися в закупівлі в
We,
окремих
as the
суб'єктів
central body
господарювання. Ми
of the
можемо
executive power,
рекомендувати, що щось робити,
we
але я не
cannot
можу, як
intervene. We can only
відчувач,
recommend.
що щось відбувається
Even
не
if I
так,
see that something
скасувати
isn't
закупівлю.
right,
Ну, як
I
це
can't
робити, тому що це
cancel
окрема юридична особа.
the procurement
Ну, я
because
вважаю, що
this
це
is done
неправильно,
by a separate
тому
legal
що ти
entity. I
просто
believe
не
this is not
маєш
right. You
впливу на
simply
цей
don't
процес. Ти
have
можеш
influence over this
рекомендувати.
process.
Звичайно,
Yes, you can
що там
recommend, and
застосовувати інші
definitely
механізми
you can
впливу,
apply
як
other
публічний,
mechanisms of
публічна історія або звільнення
impact,
осіб, які
making it
там
public,
систематично
or
порушують закон про публічні закупівлі.
firing
Але це не налагоджена система
persons who
контролю.
are violating. But this system
Тому
control
СІПС
is not set
направив
up. So SIPS
встановити
has recommended to
централізоване
us to install
керування процесом
centralized
для того, щоб ми могли
management of the process
впливати
to
на
make sure that we
регіональні
could
служби,
influence at the regional,
щоб не порушувався
influence the
закон
regional
і,
services that the law
звичайно,
is
щоб там
not
була більше конкуренція, відсутність
violated, so
дискримінації.
that
В рамках
is
цього ми
further.
попрохали Міністерство економіки підтримати нас
Therefore, we
для
have
того, щоб ми
asked the Cabinet of
створили
Ministers to
централізовану
support us
закупівельну
to
організацію,
create the
бо найбільші
centralized procurement
інфраструктурні
organization
проекти в
because the
країні
biggest infrastructural projects
просто
in
немає
the
кому
country
реалізовувати. Ну, щоб ви
simply we
розуміли,
don't
немає
have
замовника в країні,
anyone
який може
to implement.
реалізовувати
We don't have the
такого роду
consumer
проекти, як
who can
інженерні споруди в
implement
енергетиці або
the
водогонні
project
споруди,
class
які за часів
engineering
незалежності не будувались
structures
ніколи.
in energetics.
Такого масштабу проекту. Але
The
вибудувати
projects
у
of this
22
scale
регіонах
to
спроможну
build
закупівельну
in
функцію просто
22
неможливо. Ну, як
regions to
22
build up
окремі
the
області, вибудувати
capacity to make
категорійні
procurement,
стратегії,
these
закупівель,
categorical strategies,
експлуатації доріг, там мостів,
maintenance of
будівництво,
roads,
ремонт,
bridges,
контрольно-пропускні
construction,
пункти,
repairs,
енергетика,
checkpoints,
соціальне житло,
energy,
школи,
social
садочки,
housing, schools,
приватне. Це просто
kindergartens,
неможливо. Це
private. That's
потрібно
not
штат в
possible.
кожній області роздувати до
We
просто
need
неймовірної
to really
кількості,
blow up
навчати
the
їх
staff in
категоріям
each
закупівель,
oblast to
щоб
teach
вони
them
знали ринок.
categories of procurement to make sure that they
Це
know the
просто шлях
market.
нікуди, і
That's really the way
фінансування
to
для такого
nowhere.
немає. І плюс в
And they
агентстві
don't have
немає,
financing of that kind.
як на держслужбі,
Additionally,
із
in the agency
урахуванням
don't have
реформи урізання заробітних плат, там агентство відновлення урізали
this,
заробітні плати
the recovery
на
agency
60%
has
за останні
cut
3 місяці.
by 60% the salaries over the last 3 months. So the staff is not
ті
capable of
функції, які ми
fulfilling
розпочинали.
those
Тому
functions
ми
that we
попрохали
started. Therefore, we have
дозволити
asked
нам зробити ЦЗО
to
в рамках
do
окремої
this
юридичної особи для
as
того,
a
щоб
separate
донори
legal entity to
підтримали
make sure
створення
the
Center of
donors would
Excellence, не тільки про
create the
централізовану
centers of
закупівельну
excellence.
організацію, це про
It's
експертизу
about
у проєктах,
expertises
великих
of the
інфраструктурних
projects
проєктах,
in bigger infrastructure projects which have to be in Ukraine. So in case it's around, in case everybody who has the possibility to support the transparency and be part of this process and to really press to all stakeholders to make sure it's created. So we would have a separate independent supervisory board to make sure it's the and to make sure that the countries which are helping Ukraine to restore, in case we have standardized unified criteria for the selection of public procurement organizations, the forms of contracts, of international. Therefore, this capacity, it has to be somehow grown up. We don't have it in the departments, we don't have it in the regions, and it's very difficult not to buy this knowledge in the framework of realization of these big projects. So we decided to do this. The Cabinet of Ministers has supported this. We received the okay to create the regional organizations, and our donors, USAID, the American Embassy, the Anti-Corruption Institutes, the Eurasia Fund have supported us to create such organization. So I have hope that those who will be doing this next, they will be implementing this project. Many thanks. It sounds very sad, as if you are already going to leave the agency. Hopefully you can stay. All speakers said about the Ministry of Economy, to which extent the Ministry of Economy is participating in this work. So we are very much thankful to Tatiana Mishta, who is working there, for joining us. A lot of questions and a lot has been asked to us. We also received some questions during registration from one of the participants, that the Ministry of Economy, what is doing. Also, we heard a lot today about the draft law which we prepared, and those point-to-point draft laws which are in the Parliament. Maybe you can tell us what is to be expected in the construction that could really help us to resolve the situation with this low effectiveness and low competitiveness. Many thanks, Ms. Alexandra. I'm a spontaneous participant of the meeting, and I missed a little bit the context, but I do understand the problems. And first of all, I would like to thank our international partners for their assistance, for their engagement, and to our civil society for monitoring these processes of reconstruction, that for the recovery that already started in our country. We, as the Department of Public Procurement, we can most likely be an example of honest interaction and cooperation with business and civil society. We have been able to build up the ProZorro system at some point in time, which was exactly built in this close cooperation and interaction with the active civil society and representatives of the business environment. If we could summarize about the problems that were mentioned and those directions where the government is working, and the Ministry of Economy as the authorized body, I would like to mention, as it was exactly mentioned by Mr. Movchan, the parliamentaries at some point in time, they fixed authority under the government for the time being. And starting from autumn 2022, we're working under the government resolution in the sphere of public procurement. Thanks to this resolution, we can bring back the majority of procurement both in the system and into the competitive framework. A lot of people have recollected today a lot of interesting initiatives. I would also like to mention that the government, represented by all the present members, representatives of the authorities, approved the strategy about reforming the system of public procurement, for 2024-2026 years. Exactly one of the sections of this strategy is also the implementation of the projects of recovery. This is only one component. It's important to mention in general that such an important direction as construction works in the context of recovery, that's only one component of the procurement legislation, because it's quite a lot of bigger framework, and it touches upon other much bigger range of objects, not only construction. So this strategy, which I'm now mentioning, it has included a number of measures. It has the operations action plan, how we, as the representatives of power, are planning to achieve certain movement in the context of improving the procurement sphere, improving the procurement practices already in the nearest future. And those who are interested, I would really much recommend to introduce yourself to this operations plan, where we have step-by-step roadmap, which institution, who exactly will be doing what. We have very specific KPIs set up, very specific persons who are implementing this, and it's very much a good example showing what is actual government is doing to improve the procurement legislation. What you have mentioned in terms of the draft law, it's true. The ministry quite a long time is doing the work aimed at improving and building up the draft law that could introduce a number of changes to the law on public procurement. But I would love also to mention that until we in the country have the war, and until our victory, we have to rely on the governmental act, resolution 1178. I think all the subjects of this sphere know it's very much dynamically changed. We are very much flexibly responding to all the challenges, to the problems which are faced by the consumers, by the participants, and all stakeholders in the sphere of procurement. If we talk about this exact draft law, it will be resolving a significant circle of issues. And one of the main ones is the harmonization of our national legislation with the legislation of the European Union, because we, as the country of Ukraine, we have to the vector of movement to our European community. That's why we have to take into account how this regulation is done in the European Union by their directives. There would be a lot of new things which are taken from the European directives, but I would also like to mention that last spring, the Ministry of Economy created a working group whose activity is aimed at the analysis and resolution of those problematic issues that we have in part of procurement of works, reconstruction, capital repairs, because this is the requirement of the situation where we are all finding ourselves. And in the framework of this working group, we have two main directions of work. The first one is we really cooperate very closely with the Agency of Recovery, and we are developing the methodology for the procurement works for our consumers. In our country, we have a lot of consumers. We have a very much decentralized system of procurement. We have more than 35,000 of consumers. That's not a trivial job to teach the procurement specialists to correctly make purchasing effectively, competitively, in fair practices. So within the framework of this working group, we are building up methodological recommendations which aim at helping all subjects in the procurement sphere who are connected with the procurement of works to buy such works in an effective way. And all of the things that were mentioned today by Valeriia and the things that Mr. Dmytro mentioned, They will be also taken as the basis of this manual, which the procurement specialists can use. And the second work stream within this working group is studying best practices from international countries of purchasing works. Again, on the basis of such studying, we propose a number of changes to the procurement legislation, including possibly we are saying that there will be approving some typical templates for the procurement contracts, and we will be using in our legislation those approaches that follow exactly the best practices of international countries that international financial organizations are using, because they are also our partners in the future recovery of Ukraine. And we all are very much interested to make sure that such procurement would be done in a transparent, fair, competitive way. So the work is done in this direction. And to summarize, I wanted to say that we have a big and close cooperation with our European colleagues, thanks to whom last year we developed an absolutely free online course for the procurement specialists, which contains a lot of modules devoted to the topic of how to procure in our state, how to do it effectively, competitively, and transparently. And one of the modules of this online course is exactly the topic of buying works, and the lecturer is a renowned expert in the sphere of construction procurement, and I can tell you more than 10,000 consumers registered and reviewed this course, which we created in cooperation with our international partners. In this context, in the context of professionalization, we continue our work, and we will be continuing to create those instruments that will help the procurement specialists to improve their professionalism in this sphere. Apart from that, the Ministry of Economy is absolutely open to consultative support of all subjects in the sphere of procurement. We have implemented instruments that any consumer, any contractor, any participant supplier can ask a question to the Ministry of Economy to receive the public reply to their question, which they think is important. In such a way, we are trying to provide this consultative assistance to our consumers. So from the point of view of the Ministry of Economy, in these very difficult times, we're taking much effort not only to improve the legislation, but also from the practical point of view to help our society in making sure that this procurement through using of our money and through the money of our international partners would be done as effective as possible. Thank you. Many thanks, Ms. Tetiana. I think there is a comment in the chat, maybe you can comment on it, that we have a problem in the construction sphere. Is exactly about the so that the contractors the profit of the contractor in the cost estimate could be only 2.3%, which is not reflecting the real picture of the financial condition of the project. Can we solve it somehow? Because I also heard it from the representatives of the construction companies that they're not participating because this profit is limited. Therefore, they need to make up how to create a different cost. It's not to you, or is it to you? Thanks. Unfortunately, that's not the question to the resolution. It's exactly the question of how to form the project documentation, cost estimates, those normatives that are a certain subject. So this question would be more correct if we address it to the Minister of Infrastructure or the Agency of Renovation. Many thanks. Metro, please, the floor is yours. This question is twofold. Of course, it does relate to the price formation, but it also belongs to the political discussion, because 2.3% during the time of war, is it too much or is it too little? What should be the norm of profit if we are building under the European funds? We have discussed this question at several working groups, and we have proposed, in case we are building it at the funds of the European Union, then we should use the European practices and not to make El Dorado from Ukraine, where you can earn from the country who is has to live using these debts. I have also recollected the problem of defining salaries, because when we are talking about tenders, it is defined on the average level in the sphere of construction, although construction has always been this informal sector, and these official salaries will never reflect the real situation, because if they do show their real salaries, maybe we can show also these salaries, and this may also contribute to the resolution of the problem. You're right. That means that we should relaunch the resource method of calculation of costs, where we have real salaries and from which the industry shall live. But having only fragmented changes for the price formation, we will be only suffering that they are overpricing bricks to cover other costs. This could not be even the salary of the constructors, construction workers. This could be also the margin. In the Q&A, there was a question related to how to define the prioritization of the objects. I replied, it depends on where the financing is coming from. There was the order from the Ministry of Restoration. We only have a few more minutes left. I have a question to Dmitro. When you are analyzing and monitoring procurement regarding the recovery, are you studying prioritization, why this particular object was rebuilt, or you're looking at the procurement in general? During the monitoring procedure, we could study this in case prioritization would be fixed in a proper way. For the time being, in our legislation, especially in the law on regional development, they recollect the availability of the system of some strategic documents and the so-called plans of the development of territories and plans of recovery. In case they did exist, in case they would be approved, and their mandatory status would be fixed by legislation in defining the priority of construction, yes, we could use them. But for the time being, this is the gap. So factually, we are forced in many cases to reply that prioritization and the feasibility of using the funds depends on the consumer. I would like to thank all the speakers who have participated in our event. Many thanks to all the listeners who have been with us today. We see that in front of us we still have a lot to go, a lot of changes to our legislation. I would like to support what was mentioned by Tatiana from the point of view of training. Sometimes we simply have problem with the professionalism of procurement specialists, because they don't take into account some non-price criteria, although the law does allow us to do that. So we need to go back to the tender procedure, even in the times of the full-scale war, because we have lots of requests, lots of demands for recovery. Many thanks to everybody. Have a nice evening and see you next time. Goodbye.